Today I just got back from going to the hospital and getting the results of my colonoscopy I had here in Thailand. Now, if you're a little squeamish about our internal plumbing, you might want to watch one of my other videos. But if you're in your 40s or 50s, even older, and your doctor has recommended a colonoscopy, or you've been thinking about one, we're going to talk about the different steps that you need to get through in order to get a colonoscopy, and what it's like getting one here in Thailand. But in order not to bury the lead, I'll read from the report I just got back on my condition. No invasive malignancy seen. Well, that made me feel pretty good. So let's begin to talk about getting a colonoscopy here in Thailand. I'm going to break it down into 3 stages. 1, what is a colonoscopy? Why should you get one? Now, I was always afraid of getting one, and I waited until I was 78 before I had my first one. But the doctors are recommending anyone from 40 to 50 and up should consider it. 2, the prep for the colonoscopy. And 3, the colonoscopy itself and waiting for the results. The first step we're going to cover is what is a colonoscopy and why and when should we get one. I think we'll take the second question first, but before that, I wanted to give one caveat here. I'm not a doctor, and so if you have health questions, you should talk to your own doctor or do a Google search like I've been doing. What I'm going to talk about is my experience, and it would probably be your experience too if you decided to get a colonoscopy here in Thailand. I'll talk about the different steps you have to go through and whether it was as scary as I thought it would be. Now the answer is no. This whole odyssey began with my annual checkup, my annual physical checkup that I always get around my birthday in June. Everything was fine, and I was happy about that, except the doctor discovered that I was a little anemic. Not very anemic, but a little anemic. And there are a couple of reasons why a person could be anemic. You could be bleeding, you could have hemorrhoids, but one of the things that could be happening is that something in your colon is causing you to bleed. Now that got me to thinking. In the last few years, I've had 2 good friends. One man in his 80s, another in his early 50s. Both died of colorectal cancer. Now, colorectal cancer is one of the most common cancers, and if it's not treated early, it can cause some very, very serious problems, including death. So when my doctor, after finding out I was a little anemic, said, let's rule out anything going on in the colon, and the way to do that is getting a colonoscopy. Now, for the last 30 years or so, I've been trying to avoid even thinking about a colonoscopy. I was terrified of it. I didn't really know what went into it, but I did know that it was fairly invasive and there was a lot of stuff that went on inside. Now, the colon is also called the intestines, so they had to go look into the intestines. Now, this is what a colonoscopy is. A colonoscopy uses sort of a camera on a long tube to go into your colon or your large intestines, look around and see if there is anything suspicious in there. And sometimes they find some things and sometimes they don't. And I always thought, I didn't want to do that. But in fact, I was wrong. The colonoscopy is not invasive at all. I'll get through what the steps are later in the second stage. And you'll see that it's really nothing to be afraid of. But I was afraid, and I was very, very reluctant. But I got my doctor to make an appointment with a gastroenterologist. That's the kind of guy who deals with your insides, the plumbing, and to see what he said. Now, here's an interesting aside. I did some research, and it turns out to get a colonoscopy in the United States is it's a little elaborate. In order to get an appointment with your gastroenterologist, it usually takes about 6 months. That's normal to see a specialist in America. And then, it takes a couple more weeks or a couple more months before they can schedule the colonoscopy. And the cost in America is between $2,700 and $4,000. Here in Thailand, my doctor made an appointment for me to see my gastroenterologist the next morning. And I went to see him maybe 12 hours after the appointment was made. And we talked about it, and he recommended that I get the colonoscopy. I asked him, when could we do this? And he said, well, we could do this tomorrow morning. So that's the difference in timing here in Thailand. Now, how about the cost? So I asked, and it's easy to ask about the cost here in Thailand because they're very open about these things. So I said, how much is this going to cost? And he said, well, there's a package we have here, and it includes everything. It includes my fees, and it includes the medication, the anesthesia, the colonoscopy itself, and the cost was 28,000 baht. 28,000 baht today is the equivalent of about $800. So waiting 12 hours and another day to get a colonoscopy and paying $800, as opposed to waiting 6 months and maybe a couple more months and $2,700 to $4,000 cost in America. Now I'd like to answer the question of why getting a colonoscopy is important, especially for those over 50. Well, it turns out that colorectal cancer usually affects people 50 and up. That's one reason. And I think there's a more miraculous meaning or miraculous reason for getting a colonoscopy. Here's how it works. That camera has gone into your intestine. It's looking around to see if it finds things like injuries or bleeding or what they call polyps, which are little growths in the intestine. Well, here's the really interesting part. If you have no symptoms, or you're like me and you have a little bit of anemia, and the doctor wants to check you out, and then they find these things in your colon, these polyps. Well, it turns out that this is really cancer screening, colon cancer screening, because those polyps usually aren't cancerous, but they could become cancerous if they're left alone for a while. Usually it takes a long time, but if the doctor goes in and he sees these things, he has a little like a wire thing or that can kind of snip them off, and once they're gone, where he can take them in and do a biopsy like they did for me, and luckily for me no malignancies were seen, then those polyps will never turn into cancer. That means if he goes in and snips off all these little things that he finds in there, then you're cancer free. Just like I am now. I have no problem. The doctor did recommend that I wait 3 years and do another colonoscopy because other things could start growing in there. But for now, I don't have any problem with getting colon cancer because all the precancerous stuff that was in my colon is now gone. So that's the reason getting a colonoscopy starting at age 50 is probably a pretty good idea. And at 78 is probably a really good idea. We're now going to talk about the infamous colonoscopy prep. Now, if you did a Google search on colonoscopy prep, you'll get maybe a better YouTube search. You'll have some videos of people describing the horror that they go through in order to prep for the colonoscopy. It's not really a horror, it's just a big bother. In a little while, I'm going to show you what I had to go through and how I took the medication that was given to me. But you'll be given some medication, and I was told to begin taking the medication at about 5 p.m. excuse me, the day before the colonoscopy. Here's pictures of the 2 bottles. It's called Zubil. That's what it's called in Thailand anyway. It's basically used for cleaning out the intestines. And it really does a good job of cleaning out the intestines. But why do we have to clean out the intestine? Well, let's think about this. Let's say before the colonoscopy, I ate a nice big pizza and some beer, maybe some chocolate ice cream. What do you think might be floating around in your large intestines by that time? It probably wouldn't be making it easier to take those pictures of the side walls of the intestine that you need. So basically what the doctor is saying is, I need to clean you out. I need to get that all nice and clean so that I can take some good pictures to see what's really going on in there. And that's what this medication is for. Let's take a break. I'm going to go down into the kitchen and show you how I took this medication. Now, this is going to be a part of the colonoscopy program that might be the most difficult. If you check out any YouTube videos on colonoscopy prep, you'll see that I'm going to have to drink some of this medicine to clean out your colon. Now, we know that there are 5 different tastes. There's sweet and sour and salty, spicy, hot, and bitter. Well, after taking this stuff, you're going to have to add another taste bud to your list, and that will be nasty, because this is about the most nasty stuff you're ever going to eat or drink. It's quite salty, and there's no way of really describing the taste except nasty. But if you work at it, you'll find that there is a way to make this thing a little bit better. I'm going to show you what I did. Okay, now each of these bottles of Zubil, this is the nasty stuff, it's only about half full. Okay, if you try drinking it by itself, you're probably not going to make it. You might barf, and you might throw it up or just spit it out, and it just won't work. People have tried it by itself, and it's not going to work. So I started thinking, what's going to make it the best? And I thought maybe some cold water might make it a little bit better. So here's what I did. I took the bottle of Zubil, I put it into a cup, right? Yeah, it's probably only going to be up to here. But then I took the coldest water I could find right out of the refrigerator and filled it up almost to the top. So I'll show you how I do it. By the way, this is a simulation. I am definitely not going to do this again, okay? Take this, pour the liquid into your cup here. Okay, now you got to do 2 bottles of this stuff. That'll really clean out your colon. So this is the second bottle. Okay. And that's about what Zubil looks like. It's a clear liquid. Now I take the coldest water I can find and fill the glass up maybe halfway. Okay, now that we have our 2 glasses here that we're going to consume, keep this cold bottle of water, the coldest you can get, right next to you because you're going to use it. Okay, again, this is a simulation. What I did was I tried to take as big a sip as I could. And that's not easy, but you got to do it. Take as big a sip as I could, and before, and get it past my throat as quickly as possible, and then drink as much cold water as possible. They want you to drink water anyway, but the best is to drink cold water and wash this stuff down out of your mouth, and that will help. So the misery will last only for a few seconds while it's in over your tongue, and you got to do that until this is finished. Cold water, then the second class, do the same thing again, really cold water, and when it's all done, just drink as much cold water as you can, swish it around in your mouth, and you'll be able to survive this. Now remember, in about 45 minutes, a whole nother story will take over. So now that we've taken the Zubil, or the technical term is monobasic sodium phosphate. Now every time I'm given medication by a doctor that I don't know anything about, I look it up and find out what's in it and what side effects there might be there. This one just says it's for constipation and for pre-surgery, pre-colonoscopy cleansing. And cleansing it does. After taking the medication at 5 p.m., just like I was instructed, about 45 minutes later, I had to go to the bathroom. I figured that was normal because that's what this medication was for. What I didn't realize is the explosiveness of what was going to happen to me. And I exploded for the rest of the evening. The next morning, the nurse asked me how many times I went to the bathroom, and I jokingly told her, but honestly told her, I lost count after 12. And so it does a really good job. And what happens is you'll know it's done its job when the only thing that's coming out of you is some yellowish liquid, just sort of very light yellow liquid. And in fact, the nurse asked me what color it was, and she gave me a color chart, and I had to point at what color my last stool sample was, and she said, "Great, you're fine," which meant that I was completely cleaned out. So I took 2 of these bottles of Zubil, and I was told that at 9 o'clock I was to take some pills that they gave me and some milk of magnesia. I think what it was doing was it was saying, okay, you're done for the evening. You don't need to cleanse anymore. But I wasn't done for the evening. I woke up about 3 or 4 more times that evening and had to go again. The next morning, I was told I had to not eat anything, by the way, after midnight. Unless it was something like very clear liquid broth, or maybe like 7-Up, something there without any color in it. So the next morning I woke up and I was hungry. Here's a suggestion: if you have the ability to get the time right for your colonoscopy, I would suggest do it as early in the day as possible, because remember, you haven't eaten anything since the day before, and you got nothing at all inside your intestines, and you're going to be hungry. And I was really hungry, but luckily the doctor scheduled me for 9:30 the next morning. The first thing you do in the morning is I took another bottle of this milk of magnesia, which was pretty easy to take. It just kind of chalky liquid, but they wanted me to be more stable and everything calmed down, so that's I was. This is probably going to be the shortest part of the video, mainly because I don't remember much. I was asleep most of the time. First of all, they get you dressed up in hospital gowns, lay you down on a gurney, roll you into the prep room, and they made me feel as comfortable as possible. Thai nurses are wonderful. They're the sweetest people in the world, and they just want to make you feel comfortable and make things go as smoothly as possible. And these nurses were just like that. After a little while, I was rolled into the operating room, and it was 10 o'clock by this time. My schedule was for 9:30, but that was to get all dressed up and ready. The first thing that happened is the other doctor came and said hi, and he said, asked me how I was feeling, and then the anesthesiologist came in and talked to me. Now, some people think they could go through this thing without anesthesia, but that's okay. Anytime anesthesia is offered to me, I said, if it's going to, take a little pain away from me, give me the drugs. And I talked to her and I said, I don't want them too heavy because sometimes I get a little nauseous taking the anesthesia. And she said, no, we have good anesthesia medications now, and that's not going to happen. And also, I'll probably be awake 10 minutes after the procedure is finished. I said, that's great. And then she kind of, I had a intravenous thing, and she injected the anesthesia in me. And I was just trying to be cool. I was going to say, I'm going to try to stay awake for all this, right? And I counted to about 3, and that's the last thing I remember until I woke up in the recovery room. And that was it. That's all I remember. The nurses all came in and made sure I was happy, and they said, you got to lay down here for about an hour and make sure, you're not going to have any side effects. And when the hour was up, they got me up, and I got dressed and waited to see the doctor. By that time, he had the results of the pictures that he had taken. And so I went into his office, and he showed me the pictures, and he said, yeah, I found a bunch of polyps. Since you're 78 years old, you had more than the normal number. You had 17. And I said, whoa, 17. When I was reading about it in YouTube, they were talking about 3 or 4. But he said they're all really small. They're all between 0.1 and 0.4 centimeters. And what I had read, this is something you should look up yourself, is that if a polyp is bigger than 1 centimeter, then they should be looked at very carefully. But he said they're all really small, and from my experiences, you're probably fine. But we'll make a schedule for you to come back on July 4th, Independence Day for me, and we'll find out whether there's any problems. That was probably the hardest part of the whole deal, is waiting the 2 weeks for the biopsies to come back, because, you get a little bummed out and scared. I wasn't too scared because I had done enough reading, and I knew my polyps were very small, and I had no symptoms of any kind. And I went into my doctor's appointment that morning, ready to hear anything one way or the other. And the first thing he said was, you're fine, everything's benign. And I just said, wow, that's cool. And then we just talked for a while, and he said, I want you to come back in 3 years, just to, double check and see. By that time, I'll be 81, and I may or may not show up being 81. But that's it. That was my my colonoscopy experience here in Thailand. I want to mention that I think the service that I got was exceptional. I was never under any stress of any kind, no pain at all. Just the bother of taking that crazy medication that made me poop like crazy. But that's the only negative part of this whole deal, and the waiting 2 weeks for the results of the biopsy. And I wanted to recommend the nurses in Thailand, the very experienced doctors here, and the service that I got at a Thai hospital.